Today we're going to talk about the Armenian language, the official language of Armenia, a country located up in the mountains of the Armenian highlands. It's spoken by between 6 and 7 million people, around 3 million of them in Armenia. Others live in nearby areas where Armenians have historically lived, or in the Armenian diaspora throughout the world. If I were to ask you which language family the Armenian language belonged to, what would you say? Number 1, Turkic. Number 2, Indo-European. Number 3, Semitic. Number 4, Kartvelian, like Georgian. The answer is 4, Kartvelian. Actually, I lied. It's number 2, Indo-European. That means it's related to languages like English, Spanish, Russian, and Hindi. But unlike most other branches of the Indo-European language family, which have numerous members, Armenian forms its own independent branch of Indo-European by itself. Some linguists think that Armenian, Greek, and the Indo-Iranian languages may have formed a common branch in the distant past, but diverged from each other very early on. The Armenian alphabet was created in the early 5th century by the Christian monk Mesrop Mashtots, and the earliest known Armenian text, a translation of the Bible, was written soon after. We don't know much about the language before then, but the recorded history of the Armenian people in this land dates back to at least the 6th century BC. But there's other evidence that they were present before 1200 BC. One precursor to the Armenian nation may have been the Hayasa-Azi Confederation. The languages spoken there are unknown, but the name Hayasa seems to resemble the word for Armenia in Armenian, Hayastan, and the adjective for Armenian, Hay. There's evidence that the Armenians were present in the kingdom of Urartu, because there are words in Armenian that were borrowed from the extinct Urartian language. Armenia, known by that name, arose as a political entity after the fall of Urartu, but has come under the rule of many different empires. Under all of these rulers, the Armenian people spoke an earlier form of Armenian, but there was contact with other languages, and Armenian underwent a significant amount of influence from them. For instance, it was influenced by Parthian, a northwestern Iranian language and lingua franca of the Parthian Empire, then later by Middle Persian, a southwestern Iranian language, and lingua franca of the Sasanian Empire that succeeded the Parthian Empire. A large number of Parthian and Middle Persian words were adopted into classical Armenian, which lasted from the 5th century to the 11th century. Speakers of Persian and other Indo-Iranian languages can still recognize a lot of words of Persian and Parthian origin today. For example, the word for thousand, in Armenian,
Hazar,
and in Persian, Hazar. The word for bad, in Armenian,
Vat,
and in Persian, bad. In both cases, the Armenian words were borrowed from Middle Persian. Those are just a couple of examples. But there are other words that are cognates with Persian ones that were not borrowed but go all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. For example, the word for man, in Armenian,
Mart,
and in Persian, Merd. Armenian may have also borrowed from some extinct Anatolian languages such as Hittite and Luwian, as well as Semitic languages like Arabic, Syriac, and Assyrian, and Armenian may have a Caucasian substrate, meaning that it contains influence from a Caucasian language whose speakers adopted Armenian. It was also influenced by Turkic languages under Seljuk rule and Ottoman rule, for example in its noun agglutination, the way multiple grammatical suffixes are attached to noun stems. There has also been some Russian vocabulary borrowed into Eastern Armenian. Why do I need to specify Eastern Armenian? The historic land of Armenia was politically partitioned for much of its history, with Western Armenia and Eastern Armenia coming under different rulers, the Byzantine Empire versus the Sassanid Empire, the Ottoman Empire versus the Safavid Empire, and the Ottoman Empire versus the Russian Empire. This resulted in the development of two spheres of the Armenian language, with Western and Eastern dialects undergoing different developments, and with the establishment of two standard varieties, Western Armenian, based partly on the Constantinople dialect, and Eastern Armenian, based partly on the Yerevan dialect. But these standard varieties differ from all spoken dialects, of which there are many. Eastern Armenian is official in Armenia and is used in the disputed territory of Artsakh and by Armenian communities in Russia, Georgia, and Iran. Western Armenian is used by the remaining Armenian community in Turkey, Istanbul in particular, as well as in much of the Armenian diaspora throughout the Middle East and the rest of the world. The features and examples I talk about in this video will be from Eastern Armenian. For learners of Armenian, the language seems to have a steep learning curve at the beginning because of its challenging script and sounds. Some Armenian letters can be easily confused with others, as they are distinguished only by a single different stroke that might be hard to see depending on the font. Also, in writing, Armenian has long strings of consonants in a row with no vowels between them. They're not exactly consonant clusters because in speech, schwa vowels are normally inserted, which separate the consonants. But those vowels are not written, which makes these words hard to read, even for native speakers when they encounter a new word from what I hear. For example, this word meaning conscience.
Խղճմտանք.
In writing, it looks like one syllable with a cluster of 5 consonants at the beginning, but in speech, it has 3 syllables when you consider the schwa sounds. So when learning Armenian, you can't just learn the alphabet and then be able to read any word. You also need to get used to the syllable structure of the spoken language so you know where the schwa sounds go. As for the actual consonants themselves, most of them are not too difficult or unusual, though English speakers might be unfamiliar with sounds like ch and r, for example, and there's a phonemic distinction between unaspirated and aspirated stops, aspirated stops being accompanied by a puff of air. P, p, t, t, k, k, t, ts, ch, ch. Most English speakers are not conscious of the difference between unaspirated and aspirated consonants, because in English they are variations of the same consonant that are used depending on the surrounding sounds. So separating the 2 variations and treating them as separate consonants can be a challenge. Aside from such initial challenges, the biggest challenge with Armenian might be the difference between its 2 standard varieties and its widely varying dialects. But let's focus on Eastern Armenian and start with a few basic words and phrases. Hello.
Բարև.
This is informal. In more formal speech, it's
Բարև ձեզ.
or you could use a greeting that's specific to the time of day. Good morning.
Բարի լույս.
Bari means good, and Luis means light. Notice that the adjective is placed before the noun when it's part of the noun phrase. Good afternoon.
Բարի օր.
Or means day. Note that barev is often used instead. Good evening.
Բարի երեկո.
Yereko means evening. Note that adjectives only have one form, regardless of the noun's number, case, or gender. Actually, Armenian has no grammatical gender. So we have a good or kind child,
Բարի երեխա.
good or kind children.
Բարի երեխաներ.
Notice that the adjective doesn't change for the plural. Ner is a plural suffix, which is normally used on polysyllabic nouns. On monosyllabic nouns, it's usually er. Nouns in Armenian take a number of suffixes in this order: stem, plural suffix, case ending, definite suffix, or possessive suffix. We already have the first 2, yerecha, the noun stem, plus ner, the plural suffix. Yerechaner is the nominative case, which has no case ending. But if it were a direct object, it would normally be in the dative case and look like this. Yerechaneri. And there could be a possessive suffix on the end too. Yerechanerid, meaning your children, as a direct object. There used to be 7 noun cases in Armenian, but now there are 5. Nominative and dative, which I just mentioned, ablative, instrumental, and locative. There's a difference in case depending on whether a noun is human or non-human. When they're the direct object, human nouns take the dative case, while non-human nouns take the nominative case. I love my child.
Ես երեխայիս սիրում եմ.
Yerechais is in the dative case, with a first-person singular possessive suffix. I love my job
Ես աշխատանքս սիրում եմ. Աշխատանքս.
is in the nominative case, with a first-person singular possessive suffix. In the first and second-person singular possessive, in other words, for my and your, there are possessive suffixes that can be used, but there are also standalone possessive adjectives that can be used. They come before the noun, which has a definite article suffix. So let's adjust those sentences we saw before. I love my child.
Ես իմ երեխային սիրում եմ.
I love my job.
Ես իմ աշխատանքը սիրում եմ.
Im means my. The definite article suffix is like this, after a vowel, and after a consonant. There's no strict word order in Armenian. As in these sentences, the default word order is SOV, subject, object, verb, with the auxiliary verb coming after the main verb. But the relationship between words is indicated by cases and postpositions, so the word order can change. So, for example, if we take the first sentence, it could be
Ես սիրում եմ իմ երեխային.
which is SVO,
Ես եմ սիրում իմ երեխային.
which is SVO with the auxiliary verb before the main verb,
Իմ երեխային ես սիրում եմ.
which is OSV. This word order is less commonly used, but is possible. Changes in order can emphasize different parts of the sentence. For example, in this order, my child is emphasized. In this order, with the auxiliary verb and main verb reversed, The thing before the auxiliary verb is emphasized, in this case, I. And this one doesn't have any particular emphasis. One limitation is that an auxiliary verb can never come at the beginning of a sentence. Another limitation is that phrases can't be separated. So,
سیرومم
can be,
ام سیروم
but the two words can't be separated by other elements of the sentence. Armenian is also pro-drop, which means that the subject pronoun is not necessary unless you want to emphasize who the subject is. What's your name? The informal way to say this is
Անունդ ինչ է? Անունդ
is the word for name with the second person singular possessive suffix.
Ինչ
Means what?
է?
Means is. It's the third person singular form of the Armenian copula verb, which is also an auxiliary verb. The more formal way to say this is
Ինչպես ձեզ դիմել?
Inchpes means how. Dzez is the plural form of you in the dative accusative form, but it's also used for the singular in polite speech. Dimel means to refer or address and is the infinitive form, so there's no auxiliary verb. My name is David.
Անունս Դավիթ է.
Again, anun is the word for name, and s is the first person singular suffix, meaning my. And again, means is. Remember that possession could also be shown with a standalone possessive plus the definite article suffix.
Իմ անունը Դավիթ է.
I arrived yesterday.
Երեկ եմ եկել.
Word for word it's yesterday I am come.
Երեկ
Means yesterday. M on its own means I am. It's the first person singular form of the copula verb. But this verb is also used as the auxiliary verb for Armenian verb tenses. In the default word order, the auxiliary verb comes after the main verb, but in this case it comes before it, which puts emphasis on the previous word, meaning yesterday. Note that there is no standalone personal pronoun for I in this sentence, because as I mentioned before, Armenian is pro-drop. Because this auxiliary verb is conjugated for I, we know who the subject is, and the personal pronoun is not necessary. Yekel is the perfect participle of the verb,
գալ
meaning to come. In most verb tenses, the main verb is not conjugated for the subject, the auxiliary verb is conjugated, and the main verb is a participle form. The verb phrase in this sentence has past meaning, but is the present perfect form. The present perfect is formed with the perfective participle plus the present tense of the auxiliary verb.
Սկսել եմ ուտել.
I've started to eat, or I started to eat. The past perfect is formed with the perfective participle plus the imperfect tense of the auxiliary verb.
Սկսել էի ուտել.
I had started to eat. The present tense is formed with the present participle plus the present tense of the auxiliary verb.
Սկսում եմ ուտել.
I'm starting to eat. The imperfect tense is formed with the present participle plus the imperfect tense of the auxiliary verb.
Սկսում էի ուտել.
I was starting to eat. The future tense is formed with the future participle plus the present tense of the auxiliary verb.
Սկսելու եմ ուտել.
I will start to eat. The future perfect is formed with the future participle plus the imperfect tense of the auxiliary verb.
Սկսելու էի ուտել.
I will have started to eat. The one tense in Armenian that has its own standalone conjugation without the auxiliary verb is the aorist tense, or past tense.
Սկսեցի ուտել.
I started to eat. There's a pattern to how we get the different verb forms. The infinitive ends in el or al, as you can see in the infinitive for eat.
Ուտել.
The infinitive for start is.
Սկսել.
If you take away the L ending, you get the present stem. The present stem plus gives us the present participle. The aorist or past stem is the same as the present stem, but for verbs ending in al, the suffix ats is added. The aorist stem plus L gives us the perfect participle. The infinitive plus the suffix gives us the future participle.
Որտեղ է սրճարանը?
Where's the cafe?
Որտեղ?
Means where. This little diacritic here is the question mark used in Armenian. It's placed over the last vowel in the question word. Here we see again, which means is, and
Սրճարանը.
here it's in the nominative case, with a definite article suffix. The cafe is over there.
Սրճարանը այնտեղ է. Այնտեղ.
Is a demonstrative pronoun meaning over there. Armenian has a three-way distinction. Here,
Այստեղ.
there, meaning away from the speaker but near the listener,
Այդտեղ.
and over there, meaning away from both the speaker and the listener.
Այնտեղ.
I don't drink alcohol.
Ալկոհոլ չեմ խմում.
Word for word, it's alcohol, I don't drink. Notice again that this sentence doesn't have a personal pronoun because the subject is obvious from the conjugation of the auxiliary verb.
חמום,
is the present participle of khmel, meaning to drink, and
צ'ם,
is the first person singular negative form of the copular verb or auxiliary verb, which means to be, so it means am not. Notice that the negative form of the auxiliary verb comes before the main verb, and not after it, like affirmative auxiliary verbs often do. Ch is a negative prefix that can be added to any form of this verb, and also to the aorist tense or past tense form of verbs in general.
տնային աշխատանքս չավարտեցի,
I didn't finish my homework
ավարտեցի,
is the aorist form of the verb,
ավարտել,
meaning to finish, and it has the same negative prefix.
տնային աշխատանքս,
Literally means homework.
տնային,
Means home as an adjective. It's related to the noun for home or house.
տուն,
This word has cognates in many Indo-European languages, like Latin, domus, from which we get the English word dom, Russian, dom, and others.
աշխատանք,
Means work. This is the nominative form with the first person singular possessive suffix s. Earlier in the video, I talked about influences on Armenian, especially ancient ones. But it's interesting to note that rather than the extensive use of Greek loanwords and roots that are used in other Indo-European languages, Armenian often coins new words or calques using Armenian roots. For example, this word,
հեռախոս,
meaning telephone. It was coined using the Armenian root,
հեռա,
meaning tela or far, plus the root,
խոսել,
meaning to speak. Then there's this word,
երկխոսություն,
meaning dialogue. It was coined from,
երկ,
meaning to, plus chos from chosel again, meaning to speak, plus
ություն,
a suffix that forms abstract nouns. And then there's this word,
տրամաբանություն,
meaning logic. It consists of the root,
տրամ,
meaning firm or solid, plus
բան,
meaning word or speech, plus utyun, the abstract noun suffix again. Armenian is not a very widely spoken language, but it's an important part of the identity of Armenian people around the world, and it's also fascinating as a unique language isolate within the Indo-European language family, and as a language that's come into contact with a wide variety of other languages, both influencing them and being influenced by them. If you're a speaker of Armenian, how similar is your native dialect to the standard variety used in your community? And whether you use Eastern Armenian or Western Armenian, how well do you understand the other variety? Special thanks goes out to the LangFocus Patreon supporters, especially the ones whose names appear right here on the screen. They are the top-tier Patreon supporters, so many extra special thanks go out to them. Armenia lies on the edge of the Caucasus region and has come into contact with various Caucasian languages. Check out this video to learn more about the languages of the Caucasus. There are parts of this video that will blow your mind.